Greetings, travelers. This is Mid-Nite at the Drive-Thru, and welcome back to Story Time. Today, At Sea by Winston Raleigh, Chapter 1, Vincenzo. I hate every single thing about this, Vinnie muttered to himself. He sat in the front room of the site, the part that was all any outsider should ever see. A smallish, windowed office enclosure in the front corner of a larger warehouse space filled with pallets of crates. The sign on the plate outside identified this as Lux Consignment and Storage. The cover story was that people had left valuables or semi-valuables in these crates until such time as they could be sold or shipped. In reality, most of the crates had garbage that looked like it had been rescued from a garage after the adjoining house had burned down, which was appropriate, since many of these items had indeed been acquired in precisely that fashion, solely to take up space in these crates. Only 2 pallets against the far wall were empty. These were in place to cover controls for a freight lift, which, when activated, would lower the platform into a basement that was not on the plan on file with the city. The basement which was home to the real business of Lux Consignment and Storage. The cramped office enclosure contained a few filing cabinets full of records of the crates which were shipped back and forth between this location and others just like it elsewhere. Vinnie didn't know how many there were, but it was more than just a couple. He had looked in the cabinet once when depositing the paperwork for a new arrival of furniture. Flipping through the first folder, he saw addresses all up and down the East Coast. Other than the cabinets, there was only a single yellowed, low-hanging light fixture, his office chair, and an end table with 2 drawers on which he had propped an old portable television, which got lousy reception. In the old days of analog broadcast, weak signals used to make hissing bursts of static or ghosts. Now, bad digital signal could result in the screen just going solid blue with a no signal label, or else weird technicolor glitching, geometric patterns that would make a mockery of the images they were supposed to be showing, or blazes of color that made him think of the t-shirts they used to sell to hippies at the Dead concerts. As usual, it was all his wife's fault. Connie had broached the subject one night after he had come home from a particularly crap night at the bar where he had been employed as a bouncer. Some juicehead had come in, completely fried on one of the synthetics that had started showing up on the street. The guy probably couldn't have told you his own name, only that the lizard people were everywhere and that everyone had to watch out. All of which would have been just peachy if not for the knife, which he had begun slashing through the air in front of anyone who seemed disinclined to take him seriously, which was, of course, everyone. Before Vinnie had managed to grab and break the wrist holding the knife, the guy had given Vinnie a shallow slash across the palm of his outstretched hand. The sawbones at the walk-in clinic gave him antibiotics and told him not to worry. The cut hadn't been deep enough to cut any tendons or anything, but it still stung like hell. And the blade itself, which Vinnie had appropriated after the nut had started howling about "my broken fucking arm," was an evil-looking thing. It was carburized, like it had been held over a cigarette lighter to cover it with soot. Connie saw the bandages when he came in. "Vinnie," she said to him softly, "you can't keep doing this." "What am I supposed to do? They ain't exactly hiring CEOs who are high school dropouts. I do the best I can to put food on this table." "Shh," she said, softly touching his cheek. "I'm not trying to criticize you. I know you're doing your best. But this life, it's taking its toll on you. Why won't you talk to my brother?" Connie's brother, Lou, was doing very well for himself in a family business. You didn't grow up in Brooklyn in a neighborhood like his and not know what a family business was. And his sainted ma had made him swear he would never be tempted to do that kind of thing. "You're better than that, Vincenzo," she had told him. "Promise me you'll never fall in with those boys." And he had promised. And when Connie had mentioned the offer from her brother years later, he had told her of the promise to his ma, and she had relented, for a while. Every now and then she would remind him that the offer was still open. "Lou's not a bad guy, and look how well he's doing," Connie would say. And he was doing well. Vinnie couldn't deny it. Lou always sailed around in that beautiful boat of a car, looking like some kind of movie star or something. And he would always tell her, "I promised." And she would let it go. But Ma was 5 years in her grave now, and he was tired of swimming in the public pool where you never let the water go in your mouth. As he stood there in their little kitchenette, with his hand throbbing like the devil's own fire, he told her, "Fine, I'll give him a call tomorrow." She had hugged him and had said no more. She hadn't gloated, but he felt like she was gloating all the same, like he had been a fool to waste so many years dragging this ball and chain of a promise behind him when he could have been making something of himself. Of course, once he learned what kind of business old Lou was in, Vinnie knew two things. Firstly, that Connie had been wrong. Lou was indeed a very bad guy. And secondly, there was nothing he could do about it now. You didn't learn these sorts of details about the kind of people he was now working for and then just change your mind and walk away. Dead men tell no tales, the old pirate story said, and they weren't kidding. Lou had taken his call and immediately asked him to come by his office. Vinnie had spruced himself up as best he could. He no longer fit into the suit he had worn at Ma's funeral, and that had been the only one he owned. When he arrived, Lou welcomed him and talked trivialities for a bit before getting down to business. "I know you've been working at the door down at that dive on Spruce. Oddly enough, the job I have in mind for you isn't that much different." Vinnie's heart sank, but Lou saw his face droop and clapped him on the back. Now, let me finish. I want you to watch a door for me, but there aren't any customers. No drunken idiots to give the heave-ho. Once a day, you might get a delivery. They give you paperwork, you put the papers in the drawer, and that's it. You just keep an eye on anybody who comes in and send any nosy people on their way. The last time we had a nosy customer was, I think, about 6 months ago. Most of the time, you're going to feel like the Maytag repairman. Easy work, and I can pay you double what they're giving you to tangle with rummies to start. How does that sound? It sounded good to Vinnie. Of course it sounded good, and he said so. Fine. I'll have Jack give you all the details when you get there. Here's the card with the address. Welcome to the family, Lou said, sticking his hand out with a huge disarming grin. Later, Vinnie would think, I should have grabbed that hand, pulled your arm out of its socket, and beat you to death with it. But of course, such thoughts were useless by then. At the time, the only thought in his mind as he shook the sweaty hand was his Ma's voice. "Promise me." "Sorry, Ma, but a man's got to do what a man's got to do," he told her. And in the eye of his imagination, he saw her clasp her hands together like she used to do when she was praying. Like she was no doubt still doing now, deep in the earth, clasping her hands and closing her eyes. And he walked out of Lou's office more like a stray dog that had been kicked while trying to scavenge scraps from the trash bins than a man who had just been offered his golden ticket. When he had arrived at the squat gray building where he would be spending his days for years to come, Jack had welcomed him with a wad of cash as soon as he was inside. "Your sign-on bonus," Jack had said. He explained what kind of business the visible part of the building was ostensibly involved in, confessing that none of it meant anything, but that the paperwork could endure even prolonged scrutiny. Then, seemingly out of the blue, he had asked Vinnie, "You carrying?" Vinnie told Jack that he was not. He had never had any reason to distrust his ability to deal with any of life's challenges with his fists alone. Then he remembered the knife he had pocketed from the nut job at the bar was still in his coat pocket. He produced it, saying, "I guess all I have is this." "Yeah, that's okay. In fact, it's perfect. But the boss doesn't want any hardware upstairs. Nothing to make any visiting busybodies nervous. So no guns, except for what we got downstairs." Vinnie mentioned that he hadn't seen any stairs, and Jack laughed. "Yeah, I'll give you the rest of the tour tomorrow. For now, take the rest of the day off. Get something nice for your wife with your bonus." The bonus had turned out to be $5,000, and Connie had been thrilled to see things going so well so quickly. Looking back on it later, Vinnie realized that the day off was all part of the plan. He can imagine some newbies, upon seeing the rest of the tour, might be inclined to hand back the cash and run screaming out of the place. Not that they'd be permitted to at that point, but it certainly made it harder to think about turning back when the bonus was already spent. The next day, Jack had shown him the hidden controls for the lift. He depressed a button, and a deep whirring began from far below. "Last chance to bail out, Vinnie," he said. "Once you go through the looking glass, it's too late." Vinnie had shrugged and said nothing, not really sure what he could say. The lift carried them down to a deep vault beneath the warehouse, which looked like it had been furnished with things that had been taken from a hospital that closed 30 or 40 years ago. Heavy-looking steel gurneys were parked up against the wall in the main hallway. But Vinnie hardly noticed these, as his ears were intent on a muted scream that just went on and on. It made his skin crawl, but Jack didn't even seem to notice it. Jack was busily explaining the security and surveillance equipment, which were the only parts of the facility which weren't ancient. "Basically, what we do here is resource extraction," he explained, as they walked down the central hall. Through windows Vinnie recognized as one-way glass by their darkened tint, he saw children, boys and girls between maybe 5 to 11 years old, lying on stretchers with grimaces of pain or terror on their faces, their eyes clamped shut. Vinnie began to ask, "Resource?" when Jack swiped a key card through a reader and opened one of the side doors. The muted screaming sound suddenly quadrupled, and only a long accustomed habit of concealing weakness prevented Vinnie from clapping his hands to his ears to block it out. Jack studied his face for a moment and then closed the door. "These kids," he explained in the relative silence that returned, "are the cows on this farm. Kids that no one wanted, that no one will miss, but they have something that our clients want. It's something in their blood or brains or something. I don't really know the scientific part of it. All I know is that the machines they're hooked up to extract it, and our customers are willing to pay top dollar for it. And for some reason," he said, pointing through the one-way mirror at the nearest boy, "whatever this stuff is, it's better when the kids are terrified." Reacting to an expression Vinnie didn't even realize he had on his face, Jack hurriedly added, "We're not actually hurting them. Not really. We just play these tapes most of the time, and that's enough to keep them pissing their pants. Once in a while, when we have a new arrival, we have someone, one of our spooks, come down and give them an orientation." Vinnie looked at the face of the boy in the room full of noise and saw there was a mixture of terror and something else. A child trying to be strong. This sight stirred something deep within him, something far back in the past. He was trying to coax the thought from his memory when he realized Jack was still talking to him. "Good extra money for someone who don't mind getting their hands dirty, metaphorically speaking." Jack searched Vinnie's face, but evidently didn't see what he was looking for there, so he moved on with his tour. He pointed out the armory, which Vinnie thought a bit excessive for keeping a bunch of chained-up kids in check, but he said nothing. Then Jack handed him a little bottle, like Visine, but with no brand label on it, just a number. "You'll need to put a drop of this in each eye at the start of your shift each day. Don't forget. You'll get a new bottle each week, or each time we get a new cow, whichever comes first." Vinnie took the bottle, looked at it, and then looked back quizzically. "It might seem weird, but it's part of the deal. These kids, sometimes the treatment, it triggers things in them. Not often, but when it does, sometimes they can try to escape, sorta. Look, I know it sounds nuts, but it happens. Guy in Miami told me he saw one. Kid just floated through the wall at him. Normally, they aren't visible, but these drops, they're made using something that ties them to the kids, so they can't pull a fast one on you. They're pretty harmless usually. If you cut the cord between the kid and their ghost or whatever the hell it is, then the kid dies. It's not great to lose a cow, but better than having them make it outside and find someone who can see them, bring them back here." Vinnie looked at him doubtfully, but said nothing. After that, there wasn't much else to cover. From time to time, drivers would come to the single dock on the warehouse upstairs, and the driver would get buzzed in through the door to Vinnie's little guard cubicle. They'd present their paperwork and then either drop off or pick up whatever needed to be moved, and that was it. Soon Vinnie was riding up in the lift alone, and then, sitting down in the single chair in the office, he took out the eye drops and solemnly put one in each eye. Part of him hoped that this was all just part of hazing the new guy. That Jack would pop out of some unexpected corner with some other guys, and they'd all be laughing how he bought it. But deep in his heart, he didn't believe that. In the months to follow, watching drivers arrive and put their own eye drops in before going down the lift, he became more and more certain that as surreal as all of this was, it was no joke. He put the knife from the bar fight into the drawer, where it would sit collecting dust for a very long time. The years that followed became a blur. Looking back, Vinnie could only remember at most a handful of moments from his own life. The rest of the time was just the unchanging monotony of sitting in the chair in the dim cubicle or sitting in front of the TV at home. Connie harped at him about he wasn't the same man anymore, how he had grown distant. How was he supposed to tell her that spending your days above a literal torture chamber for kids was exactly the sort of thing that could make a man distant? She tried so hard to get him to have fun. He remembered the last time she had asked him to take her to the movies. Funny little cartoon about funny little creatures running a business. Monsters Incorporated, it had been called. The funny little creatures made their business sneaking into kids' rooms and scaring kids to extract energy from them, and he had practically physically dragged her out of the theater. How she had berated him for making her feel foolish. And what could he say? I just took personal affront because I am a monster, and that is what I do for a living, thanks to your shitty brother? Of course not. He couldn't say anything. He just drank the entire bottle of Absolute vodka that stared at him from the shelf, and the one he bought to replace it the following night, and then the others he bought to keep those two from getting lonely in the bin. He talked to Connie less and less, because he was always afraid that some tenuous thread inside himself would let go, and he'd find himself shaking her until her fool head rolled off, screaming that he was supposed to be better than this, damn it. He didn't go down into the basement. That wasn't required, and of that he was glad. He caught some of the drivers and spooks sniggering in his direction during that first year, until one day one of them actually spoke up. Hey, I've got my hands full. Can you press the button for me? That is, if you're not scared. Vinnie had sat up, quietly turned off the little portable TV, and walked over to the speaker, a spook named Hargraves. You're a very scary man, Hargraves, he had said. Very scary for sure. To a scared little kid chained to a wall. You will find, however, he continued as he cracked his knuckles, that the big kids in this world are more than happy to give you a run for your money. Anytime you want, you just say the word and we can dance. As he spoke this last word, he stepped up in front of the man, looming a good 6 inches over him, and while he still spoke in the same measured tone, he drove his left fist through one of the stacked wooden crates nearby to punctuate his sentence. The man looked at the driver who had entered with him for support and found that one busily inspecting a section of floor in the other direction. Hey, I didn't mean anything by it. Seriously, I was just having a little fun. I'm sorry, okay? Strangely enough, it had not been long after that little exchange that Vinnie had begun to wonder about one other nagging detail. From the very first day, he had never been able to erase the image of that boy, eyes shut tightly against the terrifying world around him, but his mouth set in the defiant line that kids make when they're trying to be brave. And he had remembered why it seemed familiar to him. For it was so alike, in manner, to the look his brother Anthony had stamped forever onto his face when they pulled his body out of the Hudson River. Anthony had been his junior by about 4 years. Their ma had loved them both and had been careful never to show favorites, but secretly, Vinnie felt like Anthony should have been a favorite. He was kind to a fault, always cheerful, always friendly, and his laughter never failed to light up ma's face, even when times were hard and she had a full cup of her own problems trying to raise 2 boys on her own after their father had died. It seemed like he had only just begun to appreciate his little brother, and then one summer day, not long after the two of them had stayed up late into the night as the elder tried to explain to the younger what going to school was going to be like, Anthony just disappeared. There were police and reporters and well-meaning neighbors all barging in and offering help or condolences or sympathies, but no one knew anything about where or how Anthony had gone. He just vanished out of the world. For 6 months, Anthony's life had been reduced to nothing but a question mark. And then, one day, someone found a brightly colored piece of fabric bobbing along the riverbank, and they had fished out his brother's lifeless body. And of course, they needed his mother to identify the remains, but she couldn't bear to go alone. So Vinnie had been there, in a place no boy that age should have to be, because there was no other man to hold her in such a moment. And he had seen that same expression frozen into his brother's features. His ma had broken down, falling to her knees and weeping with great braying sobs of despair. But he just stood there, looking. Never again would his brother light up Ma's face with his joy. Someone had put out his light. And it looked like Anthony saw it coming and braced himself for it as best he could. He buried the image of that face deep in his memories, but he never forgot it. Shortly after the run-in with Hargraves, a thought struck Vinnie like a bolt out of the blue. And once he had the thought, he could not shake it no matter how hard he tried. And the thought was this: what if Anthony had been somebody's cow? He tried then to dig a little deeper, to get a sense of how long this operation had been going on for. But the funny thing about family businesses, they don't take kindly to people who suddenly take up an interest in historical exploration. He tried to strike up what he hoped would come off as casual conversations, but everyone else he came across, all the people who went downstairs, had taken the hint in his chat with Hargraves. They were all happy to cut him a wide berth. At the family functions, to which Connie had continued to try to drag him until the divorce, people were quick to exchange pleasantries, which were absolutely appropriate, and then quickly find themselves needed elsewhere. Jack had told him that these were kids that nobody would miss. He didn't know what that meant exactly, but he had the strong suspicion that Jack was the sort of guy who would say whatever he needed to say to help himself sleep at night, without quibbling over accuracy. And he wondered if there were mothers or brothers out there right now, staring at that same question mark, not knowing what happened to the person that question mark used to be. And so it was that he sat there in his office chair, feet up on the end table, thinking about the first time Lou had shook his hand and how things might have been different, and hating all of this, when the woman walked through the wall in front of him. Walked might have been imprecise. She just came through, as if the gray concrete were merely a dense fog, and Vinnie remained sitting as he goggled at her. For one thing, she was naked as a jaybird, not a stitch of clothing. And perhaps this was necessary, as the living flames which danced around her head in place of hair would probably represent a combustion hazard to mere cloth. Her skin cast a dull orange light, like cooling molten bronze, and even from across the room he could feel her radiance heating his face. This feeling was amplified by the fact that she was glaring at him intently, but as yet she had made no move toward him. She merely stood inside the wall, to one side of the shipping-receiving door, staring in his direction. She was 7 feet tall, or possibly a little more. The dancing flames made it hard to say where she stopped, but he estimated her proper height by the small nubs of horns which protruded from points just above her temples. Her body was lean and muscular, save for her breasts, which were ample. And without conscious thought, for the first time since he had said his last goodbye to Connie, he found himself in rapt contemplation of the feminine form. After a few moments, he reached slowly for the handheld radio in the desk drawer. He risked a glance into the drawer to do this, and his eye lighted on the dusty knife that still lay there. He ignored it, and grabbing the radio, snapped it on. "Jack," he said slowly as he keyed the transceiver, There's a woman here." The woman did not react to his words. There was a pause, and then Jack's voice barked over the channel. "I don't see anybody," he said. Vinnie looked up at the camera. It was angled in such a way as to cover the secure door to the vestibule, where visitors could be buzzed in. The place where the woman had entered was outside of its viewing angle. "She didn't come through the door, Jack. She came through the wall." Suddenly, Jack's voice became excited. "Holy shit, are you serious? Okay, don't do anything unless she tries to either approach you or tries to get away. If she does anything, take that old knife you keep in the drawer and cut her cord. It'll be a bluish-white kind of cable or rope that comes out from the base of the spine. But don't do anything if you don't have to. I'm coming up. I gotta see this." The channel went dead. The woman furrowed her brow at Vinnie, and then made the deliberate semblance of looking around the room, turning her back to him for a moment. From the spot Jack had described, there sprouted not some ephemeral cord, but an obsidian black leathery tail. She turned back toward him, making intense eye contact, which seemed to say, "Does this look like something you can cut?" He grabbed the knife as he stood up. "Look, I don't know who or what you are, but I don't want to hurt you," he started. And seeing the smoldering look in her eyes, he added, "And I don't want you to hurt me." The whirring of the motors that drove the lift hummed to life, and her eyes flicked briefly in that direction. "My friend is coming up here, and I'm sure he's going to be armed. You should go." She sneered at him, and then, finally, spoke. "He is not your friend." This much was true. "I am going to kill him, and then I am going to free the captives. As for hurting me," she said, and then facing him, she brought her closed fists together, side by side, and they struck each other like the blow of a massive hammer. Her breasts squeezed together in the reduced space, but instead of being captivated by that sight, in a surreal moment, another memory cried out from his childhood. "Form blazing sword!" cried some voice. Did Anthony say that? What was it? Was it Voltron? He thought that voice was from a time when the two boys were planted in front of the television watching cartoons together. He felt like he was going crazy. As he watched, she drew her fists apart, revealing a sliver of white-hot light stretched between them. In a moment, she stood with a gleaming scimitar of light in her right hand, and then shifted into a proper battle stance with it. "As for hurting me," she said, "do you honestly think you could? With that toy?" she mocked, gesturing with a glance at Vinnie's knife. And it was true, he was ridiculously outclassed with it, compared to the terrifying blade she now wielded. All the same, he resisted the urge to drop it clattering to the ground, though he hardly knew why. He had kept it all these years to remind himself of why he had gone to Lou for this job, though that justification seemed hollow in the face of this bizarre situation. "As for hurting you," she went on, "I have been told you might be salvageable. I have my doubts. A man who will stand by and do nothing to save children from those who hunt them seems like not much of a man to me. But we shall see," she said, turning her attention to the lift. Jack's head rose into view as the lift reached the main floor. On his face, at first, was a goofy look of anticipation, like some kid jonesing to ride the big roller coaster at Coney Island when he gets to the front of the line. This expression quickly melted from his face as he saw the blazing form of the woman, and he began fumbling for the short wire-stock rifle hanging from the strap across his shoulder. "Holy shit, Vinnie, that ain't no projection, that's one of the—" He interrupted himself with a spray of fully automatic fire from the rifle. Small gouts of flame jetted out from the woman's skin at the points where the rounds struck her, each chunk of lead vaporized by contact with her, in an arced line from her waist up to her left shoulder. Jack stood gape-mouthed as the smoke and flame cleared, revealing not even a scratch on the dully glowing bronze skin. "Shit, shit, 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 shit!" he started gibbering as he tried to reverse the lift controls to sink back down. But whether he was using them wrong in his panic, or whether the electronics were taking their orders from a new master, he did not move. She looked at Vinnie and grinned wickedly. "My turn," she growled, and leaped across the room in a single pounce. Slashing with her blade as she landed before him, she turned with her back to Jack, as that one's innards began to unload themselves onto the floor. The upper half of his body slid down at an angle across the clean cut her blade had made, and he fell in 2 chunks, gurgling as he did so. She looked at Vinnie and roared at him. "You have been paid to sit in this room for years, waiting in the event that anyone came to disturb the depredations of the vultures who have preyed on children beneath this room. I have come for that very purpose, to put a stop to their feast. You see now that you have no chance of winning against me. Tell me why I should let you live." He cast his head down. She was right. He had. He had thought it made a difference that no one else outside knew that this was what he was doing, but here it was. He knew what was going on, or at least some of it. He had even considered that something similar might have happened to his own brother, and yet he had done nothing. He had taken the money, which he had wanted to use at the outset to secure his marriage, and when the woman he had loved had been unable to live with the strange, withdrawn shade he had become and slipped away, not with angry recriminations, but only confused sadness, he had kept taking the money, because it was all that was left. Never once had he even thought of doing something to stop what they were doing. He got down on his knees, still looking to the floor. "You probably shouldn't," he answered her. "Long ago, my ma told me not to get involved with people like these, made me promise that I would not do so. Yet here I am. I broke that promise. I should pay for it." He waited for what seemed a very long time, expecting the blow that kept refusing to come. He imagined that he would feel it as a line of immense heat, like a paper cut that goes all the way through. He waited. "You should," she said, after a very long time, "and so you shall. But what I was told appears to have some truth to it. It seems to me now that you could perhaps do more to repay your dishonor by living with a newfound purpose, if you had one, than by joining your friend here on the floor in death." He said nothing. He waited. "You know that there are many of these parasites," she declared. "If you devote the years which remain to you, and to hunting them as I do, and freeing the captives on whom they feed, and if you remain true to this purpose, and do not waver or accept bargaining or deals, if you remain true, I will spare your life. On the other hand, if you betray this purpose, I will hunt you myself and see to it that your death is 10,000 times more prolonged than this one's was." She emphasized this last by stamping on the remains of Jack's chest, which made a soft squishing noise. He waited. He felt it was important to let her speak every word. "Do you accept my offer, Vincenzo? Do you swear yourself, your very soul, to this purpose?" she asked. He thought of Anthony, of the look of resolved bravery he had seen there on his dead brother's face so many years ago, and the boy who had reminded him of that face in the dark hall below this place. And suddenly he realized that whether his brother had been a victim of this particular type of predator or not, the end result was the same. They were people, bad people, running without restraint in the world, turning good people, good lights in a dark world, into question marks, ending stories, closing books. And if someone was willing to give him a chance to put a stop to even a part of that, he had to try. He had wasted so much time, but it was not too late. If he could save just one from falling into their hands, it would be worth it. He could be better than this, even as his ma had wanted for him. "I do," he spoke softly. He tilted his head up to look at her, but there was no one there. She was gone. There were only the cooling remains of Jack to give any sign that she had been there at all. "Well," he told himself, "time to get to work." End of chapter 1. Thanks for stopping by, and watch this space for the next time we get a transmission from Winston. Until then, thank you and drive through.